Imagine a player with a test batting average of 57 and a bowling average of 11. Now, imagine her teammate, a woman who could reportedly bowl near 100 kmph of a mere 6-step runner. In Feb 1958, at the St Kilda cricket ground in Melbourne, Betty Wilson and Faith Thomas walked onto the field together. Today on Women's Cricket Central, we're diving into the legendary 1958 test against England to tell the story of these two titans. Let's start off with the first ever Indigenous woman to represent Australia in any sport, Faith Thomas. She was making history of a different kind. Born at the Nepabuna Mission and raised in South Australia away from her family, Faith called herself the chosen one in an interview with Siddharth Monga in late 2019. Why did she live away? We'll have to look at the Australian government for that. Aboriginals, who on average lived 20 years less than the rest of Australia, were struggling hard to maintain their population in the late 19th and early 20th century. This sudden spike in infant mortality after coming in contact with the migrants led the whites, who also happened to be the powers that be, to the assumption that full-blood tribal Aboriginal population would be unable to sustain itself and was doomed to extinction. They came up with the infamous Stolen Generations policy to counter this. The idea was to remove Indigenous children from their families by the Australian federal and state government agencies under acts of their respective parliaments. They reasoned that mixed-race children this way could be trained to work and over generations would marry into and be culturally assimilated into white society. For a country that's considered to be one of the most progressive in the modern era, it's hard to comprehend that they believed they were doing Indigenous communities a favor by civilizing them. So, Tinipa, as she was named at birth, was taken away when she was 3 months old and given an English name, just like the other Aboriginal kids. Brought to Colebrook Home in Quorn, she later got a chance to study nursing at the Royal Adelaide Hospital, which is where she got into hockey and cricket. Having spent a lot of her formative years hurling rocks at galas, who knew that this would shape the career of Auntie Faith? It was that slingy javelin throw action that gave her terrifying speed. Technically, Faith was a bit of an outlier. Most fast bowlers need a long rhythmic run-up to generate momentum, but with Faith, all she needed was 6 steps, and she still managed to terrify the English batters. A part of the lore is a famous story of her cleaning up the defences of then English captain Mady Duggan in a practice game with such force that the middle stump didn't just fall, it cartwheeled over the wicketkeeper's head. You must be thinking that Faith must have pouched oodles of international wickets with the skill, and must be somewhere on top of the wicket chart. Well, the truth is that she has 0 international wickets, and barring that Melbourne Test, she never played for Australia ever again. Yep, you heard it right. And that's where her story has a unique twist. Faith saw cricket as a weekend hobby. Her true calling was nursing. She was one of the first Aboriginal nurses in Australia, often travelling thousands of miles to deliver babies in remote communities. After her debut test, she chose not to tour England and New Zealand despite being drafted in, because she didn't want to leave her patients and walked away from the game at the height of her powers. And there was also the small matter of the fearless pacer not comfortable with the idea of travelling by sea. A trailblazer who fought for the rights of Aboriginals, females, nurses and many more. In her honour, WBBL instated the annual Faith Thomas match, an encounter between Adelaide strikers and Perth Scorchers. The winner of the match is also presented with the Faith Thomas trophy at the end of it. Moving from one trailblazer to another, Betty Wilson didn't just play cricket, she obsessed over it. Growing up in Collingwood during the Depression, access to fancy gear was a luxury her folks couldn't afford. Her father made her shoes by hand, and her mother hung old stockings with balls inside from the ceiling, so Betty could practice hitting unpredictable movements for hours. Betty loved playing all sorts of sports, but settled upon cricket when it more or less chose her at a tender age of 10. She and her father took a walk down the road one night to watch the Collingwood Ladies Cricket Club at training. As they walked around the ground, a ball landed at Betty's feet. She returned it from the boundary straight to the wicketkeeper. After doing this a couple more times, she was approached by someone from the team and asked if she would like to play a game. Naturally, she said yes. From there, she never looked back. She had a distinguished international career by the time she retired, averaging 58 runs and 6 wickets a game. Having played just 11 tests in a career that spanned 10 years, the Second World War unfortunately robbed her most of her career. It wasn't like they got to play a lot of international matches when normalcy was restored. While people sacrificing to make their careers work is not too uncommon, she made choices that had an influence even on her post-cricket life. She was engaged to be married when she was first selected to travel to New Zealand in 1948, but her fiancé agreed to postpone the wedding so she could do the tour. It was an opportunity that was too good to refuse. He also agreed to a postponement when the English team came to tour in the summer of 1948, but he'd had enough of it when she had another tour come up in 1951. The young man didn't want to wait any longer, and leaving cricket wasn't a choice Betty even remotely considered. By the time the 1958 Ashes arrived, she was a force of nature, and it's in that Melbourne Test she did something no human had ever done in a test match before. She became the first cricketer to achieve the double of a century and 10 wickets in a test match. In the first innings, she took 7 wickets for 7 runs, including the first ever hat-trick in women's test history. She then walked out to bat and scored a defiant 100 to help Australia win the game after being bundled out for 37 in the first innings. It took the men's game another 20 years for someone to replicate that feat. So enamored was the Don himself by it that he chose to attend the next test to catch a glimpse of Betty. Funnily enough, it was Faith who noticed Don clapping at the sight of what he witnessed. Unlike Faith, Betty would play a couple more tests till the series ended before bidding goodbye to the sport she loved. She became a champion bowls player in her dotage and continued to support women's cricket, often to be found sitting in the MCG stands watching on the young girls. 2 icons, 1 historic test, and a legacy that changed Australian women's cricket forever. If you enjoyed this visit into the roots of the game, subscribe and turn on the notifications. We've got videos dropping every Monday and Thursday, and you wouldn't want to miss the next one. Until then, that's a goodbye from me.